For 72 sleepless hours, Arthur Vance sat like a stone statue beside his son's hospital bed, praying that Julian would survive the wreckage of the car crash. He paid little mind to the patient in the next bed, an elderly woman named Martha, separated by only a thin privacy curtain, whom he had offered coffee and conversation to out of simple pity. But on his final night at Providence Medical Center, that pity turned to ice in his veins. Martha gripped his calloused hand with a terrifying clarity and whispered, "Run away from him, while you still can." At the time, Arthur dismissed it as the delirium of a lonely, medicated mind. He was wrong. Only 3 days after leaving that hospital, he would uncover the devastating truth and realize that her warning wasn't madness, it was a countdown. The drive back to West Seattle was suffocatingly quiet. Arthur gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford truck until his knuckles turned white, his eyes fixed on the rain-slickened pavement of the I-5. Beside him, Julian sat slumped in the passenger seat, staring blankly at the blur of passing headlights. His arm was in a sling, and a dark bruise bloomed across his jawline like a storm cloud, but he was alive. Arthur glanced at his son, expecting to feel the overwhelming relief that had eluded him in the ICU. Instead, he felt a cold, jagged stone in his stomach. Martha's whisper echoed in the cab, bouncing off the fogged windows. "Run away from him." Arthur shook his head, physically trying to dislodge the old woman's voice. She was confused, he told himself. She did not know Julian. She did not know the boy Arthur had raised alone since his wife died, the boy he had taught to swing a hammer and catch a baseball. She saw a monster where Arthur saw a victim. They pulled into the driveway of the craftsman house Arthur had built with his own hands 40 years ago. The house stood dark and wet against the gray sky. "Home sweet home," Julian murmured. His voice was raspy, lacking its usual charm. Arthur killed the engine. "You are safe now, son. Just take it easy." He helped Julian out of the truck, supporting his weight as they walked up the porch steps. Julian leaned heavily against him, smelling of antiseptic and stale hospital air. Inside, the house was silent, filled with the shadows of the late afternoon. Arthur led him to the guest room on the ground floor, settling him onto the bed. "Do you need anything?" Arthur asked, hovering in the doorway. "Water? Pain meds?" Julian shook his head, sinking into the pillows. "Just sleep, Dad. Thanks for everything. You are a lifesaver." Arthur nodded and closed the door, but the phrase hung in the air. Lifesaver, it felt less like gratitude and more like an observation. That night, the rain turned into a deluge, hammering against the roof like stones. Arthur lay in his bed upstairs, staring at the ceiling, unable to close his eyes. Every time he drifted off, he saw Martha's terrified gaze. He tossed and turned for hours before finally giving up. Needing water, he crept downstairs, his footsteps silent on the wood floors he had sanded himself. He reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. The guest room door was wide open. The bed was empty. A flicker of movement caught his eye in the living room. Arthur moved closer to the doorway, peering into the gloom. Julian was standing by the large picture window, perfectly still, watching the storm rage outside. He wasn't leaning on the wall for support. He wasn't clutching his injured arm. He stood straight, rigid, his silhouette cut sharp against the street lamp's glow. "Julian," Arthur whispered. Julian did not flinch. He didn't turn around. He just kept staring out at the dark street, his reflection in the glass looking ghostly and hollow. For a second, the lightning flashed, illuminating Julian's face. There was no pain there. No exhaustion. Just a cold, blank calculation. It was the face of a man waiting for a train, not a man who had just survived a near-fatal crash. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the drafty house. He stepped back into the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs. He remembered the way Julian had wept in the hospital when the doctors were watching, and he compared it to the statue standing before him now. Martha's voice returned, louder this time. "Run away from him." Arthur turned and walked back upstairs, locking his bedroom door for the first time in 20 years. He told himself it was just stress, just the trauma of the accident playing tricks on his mind. But as he lay in the dark, listening to the rain, he knew that something in his house had changed. The boy he brought home was not the boy he remembered. And the countdown Martha had warned him about had already begun. For the next 2 days, the house in West Seattle ceased to be a home and became a minefield. Julian did not stay in the guest room to recover as the doctor had ordered. Instead, he commandeered Arthur's home office, a small, quiet sanctuary at the back of the house where Arthur kept his design sketches and tax records. Julian claimed he had a backlog of critical paperwork from his brokerage firm that needed immediate attention. He insisted that if he did not work, the accident would cost him his career. Arthur, wanting to be supportive, agreed, though it pained him to see his son hunched over the desk with his arm in a sling, typing furiously with one hand. But the atmosphere in the house began to shift, subtle as a change in barometric pressure. Arthur was a man of precision. He was a retired foreman who could spot a beam that was out of level by a fraction of an inch. Now, in his own domain, things were drifting. He noticed the small things first. The mail he left on the hallway table was shuffled, the envelopes opened and then hastily stuffed back together. The spare key to the garage, usually hanging on a third hook, was moved to the counter. A notepad by the phone had pages torn out, leaving jagged edges. On the afternoon of the second day, Arthur approached the closed office door. He carried a tray with a sandwich and a cup of tea, thinking Julian needed to keep his strength up. He could hear Julian's voice inside, low and urgent. Arthur turned the knob and pushed the door open. Julian was pacing the small room, his back to the door, a cell phone pressed to his ear. "I told you I am handling it," Julian hissed into the phone. "The asset is liquid. I just need a few more days to prepare the..." Arthur stepped onto the rug. The floorboard creaked. Julian spun around. The phone snapped shut in his hand. The expression on his face was not the gratitude of a son being brought lunch. It was pure, feral rage. His eyes bulged, and his lip curled back from his teeth. "Jesus, Dad!" Julian shouted, the sound exploding in the small room. "Do you know how to knock? This is a private client call." Arthur froze, the tray trembling in his hands. The tea sloshed over the rim of the cup, staining the napkin brown. He had never seen Julian look at him like that. It was the look of a stranger. It was the look of an enemy. I brought you lunch," Arthur stammered, feeling suddenly small in his own house. "I thought you might be hungry." Julian stared at him, his chest heaving. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the rage vanished. The mask of the charming, successful son slid back into place, though the edges seemed jagged and ill-fitting. Julian ran a hand through his hair inside. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. It is the concussion. And the stress. I almost lost a big deal because of the accident. I am just on edge." He walked over and took the tray, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Thank you for the sandwich. You are too good to me." Arthur nodded, backing out of the room. It is okay, son. Just try to rest." He closed the door, but his heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He walked to the living room and sat in his armchair, staring at the rain streaking the window. He replayed the words he had heard. "The asset is liquid." That night, the silence of the house felt heavy, charged with secrets scurrying behind the walls like rats. Arthur lay in bed, listening. Around 2 in the morning, he heard it again. A voice downstairs. He crept to the landing. Julian was in the kitchen below. The voice was a hushed whisper, but in the stillness of the night, it carried up the stairwell. "He suspects nothing," Julian was saying. "He is just an old man. He is soft." Arthur gripped the banister. "Yes, I have the access codes," Julian continued. "I am looking for the deed now. It has to be in the office." Arthur stepped back from the edge, his breath catching in his throat. He retreated to his room and sat on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking in the dark. The warning from the hospital was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. The changes in the house, the aggression, the hushed calls. It wasn't paranoia. Julian was looking for something. And Arthur realized with a sick feeling in his gut that the thing Julian was looking for was the life Arthur had spent 70 years building. The invasion had begun, and the enemy was sleeping downstairs. Day 3 arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise, threatening more rain. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic rasp of Julian snoring drifting down the hallway from the guest room. He had finally fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep after staying up until dawn, leaving the coast clear. Arthur Vance stood outside the door to his own office. His hand hovered over the knob. The conversation he had overheard the night before, about access codes and deeds, had been looping in his mind like a fever dream. He needed to know what was happening in the room where he had spent years managing his modest life. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale coffee and Julian's expensive cologne, with an underlying note of nervous sweat. It was a violation of Arthur's sanctuary. Papers were strewn across the desk. A coffee mug had left a dark ring on the oak surface Arthur had varnished himself. Arthur began to clean. It was a nervous habit, a need to restore order to chaos. He straightened the pins. He aligned the coaster. Then, he picked up the trash bin next to the desk. It was full. Arthur frowned. He was meticulous about emptying the trash. He looked closer. The bin was filled with paper that had been shredded, not by a machine, but by hand. The pieces were jagged, torn with a violence that suggested anger or panic. Arthur sat down on the floor, his knees popping with the effort. He dumped the contents of the bin onto the rug. His instincts, honed by 40 years of reading blueprints and inspecting construction sites for hidden flaws, screamed at him. He needed to see what his son had tried to destroy. It was a puzzle, and Arthur had always been good at puzzles. He began to sort the pieces, smoothing out the crumpled edges. He found a roll of Scotch tape in the desk drawer and started working. The silence of the house was amplified by the scratching of paper and the soft tear of tape. It took him an hour. When he taped the final piece of the first document together, his breath hitched in his throat. It was a letter on heavy stationery. The logo at the top was a green crown. The Emerald Queen Casino. Arthur read the text, his eyes struggling to focus on the words through the sudden blur of tears. It was a final demand for payment. The number at the bottom was typed in bold, red ink. $150,000. $150,000. It was an impossible sum. It was more than Julian made in 2 years. It was a debt that got people hurt. His hands shaking, Arthur pushed the debt notice aside and began to assemble the second document. There were fewer pieces here, but the picture they formed was far more devastating. It was a legal draft, typed up on Arthur's own computer. At the top, in standard legal font, it read, "Quitclaim deed." Arthur read the lines below. Asterisk grantor, Arthur Vance. Grantee, Julian Vance, asterisk. The document detailed the transfer of the property, the house Arthur had built with his late wife, the house that was fully paid off and mortgage-free, to his son. For the sum of $1. The room spun. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him like the deck of a ship in a storm. Arthur leaned back against the desk, gasping for air. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying finality. The accident. The desperate need to stay in the house. The work in the office. The hushed phone calls. Julian was not working. He was drowning. And he had come home not to heal, but to salvage the wreckage of his own life by stripping his father of everything he owned. Suddenly, Martha's voice from the hospital exploded in his mind, louder than the rain against the window. "Run away from him, while you still can." Arthur stared at the taped papers. Martha had not been confused. She had not been senile. She had recognized the smell of a predator because she had been bitten by one herself. She had tried to tell him. It was a countdown. The realization washed over Arthur, bringing with it a nausea so profound he had to close his eyes to keep from retching. The clock was ticking. The casino wanted their money. Julian needed the house to pay them. And Arthur. Arthur was just the obstacle standing in the way of the transaction. He looked at the quitclaim deed again. It was just a draft, but it was a statement of intent. His son did not love him. His son was calculating the value of his life against a gambling debt. Arthur carefully peeled the taped documents off the rug. He did not crumple them. He folded them with the precision of a man handling explosives. He walked out to the garage and hid them beneath the liner of his heavy red toolbox, under a set of wrenches Julian would never touch. He stood in a cold garage, his breath fogging in the air. He could not stay in the house. Not right now. If he looked at Julian, the mask would slip, and he would scream. He needed to understand. He needed to talk to the one person who had seen the truth before he did. Arthur grabbed his keys, got into his truck, and backed out of the driveway. He drove through the rain, his mind on autopilot, until he found himself pulling into the parking lot of the Riverside nursing home. He needed to see Martha. He needed to know the rest of the story. Arthur walked into the lobby of Riverside nursing home, shaking the rain from his coat. The place smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a scent that reminded him too much of the hospital. He asked the receptionist for Martha Higgins and was directed to a common room at the end of the hall. He found her sitting in a wheelchair by a large window, watching the rain beat against the parking lot asphalt. She looked smaller than she had in the hospital bed, frail and translucent like a dried leaf. A knitted blanket was tucked around her knees. She did not turn when he approached, but when he pulled a chair up beside her, she spoke. "You found it," she said. Her voice was weak, but her eyes, when she finally looked at him, were sharp, clear, and infinitely sad. Arthur sat down, twisting his cap in his hands. He felt a lump in his throat that made it hard to speak. "How did you know?" He finally choked out. "I found the papers. The debt. The deed. But how could you possibly know just by looking at him?" Martha turned her gaze back to the window. "Because I have lived it, Arthur." She told him her story then, her voice a soft murmur against the drumming of the rain. She spoke of a son named David, a boy she had loved more than her own life. A boy with a bright smile who could charm the birds from the trees. He had started small, asking for loans to cover rent, then credit cards for emergencies. She had given it all, believing his tears, believing his promises to change. Then came the day he asked for the deed to her house, just to secure a business loan, he had said. He promised she would live there forever. She signed it because she trusted him. 6 months later, the sheriff arrived to evict her. David had sold the house and vanished with the money, leaving her with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a broken heart. "I listened to your son on the phone that night in the hospital," Martha said, turning to face Arthur. "He thought you were asleep. He thought I was senile, just a piece of furniture in the room. He was talking to someone about leverage, about how easy it would be. He called you, the old man." Arthur closed his eyes. The tears leaked out hot and burning. To hear it confirmed by a stranger was a different kind of pain than finding the papers. It made it real. It made it public. "He laughed about it," Martha whispered. "He said you were soft. That you would sign anything he put in front of you." Arthur opened his eyes. The sadness was hardening into something else. Something cold and heavy like iron. Martha reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Her trembling hand pulled out an object wrapped in a tissue. She unfolded it to reveal an old silver pocket watch. The glass face was cracked, and the metal was tarnished black with age. She pressed it into Arthur's calloused hand. "My husband gave this to me on our wedding day," she said. "It stopped working the afternoon I signed the final paper for my son. 3:15. That was the time my life ended, Arthur. That was the time I became homeless. That was the time I realized that love is not enough to save someone who does not want to be saved." Arthur looked down at the watch. The hands were frozen, black lines against a yellowed face. 3:15. "Keep it," she said. "Let it be your reminder. You are a good man, Arthur. I can see that. But goodness is not a shield against evil, especially when that evil shares your blood. You have to stop being a father now. You have to be a survivor." Arthur closed his hand around the watch. The metal was cold against his palm. He looked at Martha, this woman who had lost everything, and realized she had given him the only thing she had left, the truth. "Thank you," Arthur whispered. He stood up. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in his chest, but beneath it, a resolve was forming. He tucked the watch into his pocket, right next to his heart. It felt heavy, a physical weight to remind him of the countdown. Arthur drove away from Riverside Nursing Home with the windshield wipers slapping a steady rhythm. He was not going back to the house yet. He could not go back unarmed. He drove to the industrial district, past the warehouses and the shipyards, to a part of the city that smelled of diesel and damp wool. He parked in front of a narrow brick building and climbed the stairs to an office with a frosted glass door. Saul Berkowitz, Private Investigations. He needed a professional. He needed someone who could look at his son and see the criminal, not the child. He needed to know exactly what he was up against before he walked back into the lion's den. Saul Berkowitz looked like a man who had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain for too long. He sat behind a scarred metal desk piled high with manila folders, his face a roadmap of deep lines and cynical experience. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke and old paper, a scent that clung to the dusty blinds covering the single window. He did not stand up when Arthur entered. He simply looked over the top of his reading glasses, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I enclosed," Saul grunted, turning a page in the file he was reading. "Come back tomorrow. Or better yet, do not come back at all." "I need help," Arthur said, standing his ground. He did not have time for politeness. "My name is Arthur Vance. I believe my son is trying to steal my home." Saul sighed, a sound like a tire losing air. He closed the file and took off his glasses. "Mr. Vance, I am a forensic accountant and a private investigator. I deal with corporate fraud, embezzlement, and hiding assets in the Cayman Islands. I do not do domestic disputes. They are messy. They are emotional. And they always end with everyone crying in my office. Go to the police. Or a family therapist." Arthur did not move. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded bundle of papers he had retrieved from the trash. He walked to the desk and laid them down, smoothing out the creases where the Scotch tape held the shredded strips together. "He is not just stealing," Arthur said quietly. "He is desperate. And I think he is dangerous." Saul glanced at the papers dismissively, but then his eyes caught the green logo at the top of the first page. The Emerald Queen Casino. He leaned forward. He saw the red ink at the bottom. $150,000. He picked up the document, his thick fingers handling the taped paper with surprising delicacy. He read the debt notice. Then he picked up the second document. The quitclaim deed transfer. Saul read it twice. He looked at the dates. He looked at the sum. $1. He set the papers down and looked at Arthur. The dismissal in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, professional assessment. "This is not a domestic dispute," Saul said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is a bleed out. Your son is deep in the hole, Mr. Vance. The people who run these books at the Emerald Queen. They are not banks. They do not send late notices. They send breakers. He wants my house to pay them off," Arthur said. Saul shook his head. "He wants your house because it is the only asset he can liquidate quickly. But this draft..." Saul tapped the deed. "It shows intent. He is not asking you for help. He is preparing to take it. Will you help me?" Arthur asked. "I need to know the rest. I need to know who he is meeting. I need to know how far he has gone." Saul picked up a pen and tapped it against the desk. "I charge $200 an hour. Plus expenses. And I work alone. I will pay whatever it costs," Arthur said. "I have savings." Saul nodded slowly. "All right. I will dig. I will pull his financials, his phone records, and his movements for the last month. If he has a shadow, I will find it." Arthur exhaled, a tension he hadn't realized he was holding releasing from his shoulders. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Saul said sharply. He leaned over the desk, his gaze intense. "Listen to me carefully, Arthur. This is the hard part. You have to go back to that house. You have to cook dinner. You have to watch television with him. You have to ask him how his day was. And you cannot let him see even a crack in the armor." "I can do that," Arthur said. Saul looked skeptical. "You are a father. It is hard to look at your child and see a criminal. But if he suspects, if he thinks the walls are closing in, he will panic. And desperate men do reckless things. You have to play the role of the naive, trusting old man. Can you do that?" Arthur thought of the watch in his pocket. He thought of Martha sitting in her wheelchair. He thought of the empty, dead look in Julian's eyes by the window. "I can do it," Arthur said. "Because the son I loved is already gone." Arthur left the office and drove back to West Seattle. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black under the streetlights. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, watching the warm glow of the living room window. It looked so inviting, so normal. It was a stage set. He took a deep breath, composing his face. He relaxed his jaw. He softened his eyes. He summoned the ghost of the father he used to be. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Julian was sitting on the couch, his arm in a sling, watching a baseball game. He looked up when Arthur entered, offering a tired, boyish smile. "Hey, Dad," Julian said. "Where have you been?" "I was getting worried." Arthur hung his coat on the rack. He walked into the living room and forced the corners of his mouth upward. "Just went for a drive, son," Arthur lied, his voice steady and warm. "Needed to clear my head." "How are you feeling?" Julian relaxed, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Better. Much better now that you are home." Arthur walked past into the kitchen to start dinner, passing within inches of the man who was plotting to destroy him. He did not flinch. The performance had begun. The week that followed was a performance that drained Arthur Vance to his very marrow. He lived in his own house like a spy in enemy territory, cooking breakfast for a son he now knew was a stranger, making small talk about the weather while his mind screamed with the knowledge of the shredded documents hidden in the garage. 7 days of silence. 7 days of watching Julian pace the floorboards with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping to a whisper whenever Arthur entered the room. 7 days of watching him jump every time a car slowed down outside the house, his eyes darting to the window with the paranoia of a hunted animal. Then, the call came. Arthur met Saul Berkowitz at a small, grease-stained diner 3 towns over, far enough away that no one would recognize them. It was raining again, a relentless gray drizzle that blurred the world outside the window. Saul sat in a back booth, looking more tired than usual, his eyes heavy with the weight of what he had found. A thick brown envelope sat on the formica table between his coffee cup and an untouched plate of toast. Arthur slid into the booth opposite him. He did not take off his coat. "Is it bad?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. Saul took a sip of coffee, black and bitter. He tapped the envelope with a thick finger. "It is worse than we thought, Arthur. It is not just gambling. It is a complete fabrication of a life." Arthur stared at the envelope. "Open it." Saul slid the dossier across the table. Arthur undid the clasp and pulled out the stack of papers. The first page was a photocopy of a letter on corporate letterhead. It was a termination notice from the brokerage firm where Julian claimed to be a senior partner. "He has not been a real estate broker for 2 years, Saul said quietly. He was fired for commingling client funds. He was using escrow money to cover his gambling losses. They did not press charges because his boss liked him and wanted to avoid a scandal, but he was stripped of his license." Arthur felt a cold numbness spreading through his chest. 2 years. For 2 years, Julian had put on a suit every morning, picked up his briefcase, and left the house to go to a job that did not exist. Every story about a sale, every complaint about a difficult client, every celebration of a bonus had been a lie. Arthur turned the page. It was a police report. A toxicology screening from the night of the accident. "The accident," Saul continued, his voice devoid of judgment, just stating facts. "It was not the rain, Arthur. And it was not another driver. Your son blew a .18. He was drunk. And he had traces of amphetamines in his system. Arthur read the numbers. .18. More than twice the legal limit. He crashed because he was fleeing, Saul said. I pulled the traffic camera footage. He was speeding. He was erratic. He was running from a meeting at the casino. He was terrified. Arthur turned to the final section. It was a financial breakdown. A spiderweb of debts. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. Personal loans from payday lenders with criminal interest rates. And at the bottom, the marker from the Emerald Queen Syndicate. $150,000. He is drowning, Arthur, Saul said softly. He has dug a hole so deep he cannot see the sky anymore. And drowning men will pull anyone down with them to stay afloat. Even their fathers. Especially their fathers. Arthur closed the folder. The image of the successful, charming son he had bragged about to his friends at the hardware store evaporated like smoke. There was no successful broker. There was only a desperate, addicted man living on borrowed time and stolen money. Arthur looked out the window at the gray parking lot. He felt a profound sense of grief, not for the son he had, but for the son he thought he had. That boy was dead. He had died 2 years ago, or maybe even before that, consumed by the wolf that now wore his face. What do I do? Arthur whispered. Saul leaned forward. You have the truth now. The question is, what are you going to do with it? You can walk away. You can call the police. Or you can go home and confront him. But be careful, Arthur. When you corner a wolf, it does not beg for mercy. It bites. Arthur picked up the heavy envelope. It felt like he was holding the ashes of his family. I am going home, Arthur said. He paid for the coffee, stood up, and walked out into the rain. The drive back to West Seattle felt different this time. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He pulled into the driveway and saw the light on in the kitchen. Julian was home. The wolf was in his den. Arthur checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were old and tired, but they were steady. He grabbed the dossier, stepped out of the truck, and walked toward the front door. The performance was over. It was time for the curtain to fall. Dinner was ready when Arthur walked into the kitchen. The room smelled of oregano and melted cheese. Julian had ordered a pizza, playing the part of the recovering invalid to perfection. He sat at the small wooden table, nursing a glass of soda, and smiled when Arthur entered. Hey, Dad, Julian said, gesturing to the open box. I grabbed us a pepperoni. I thought we could watch the game tonight. The Mariners are playing. Arthur did not speak. He did not take off his coat. He walked to the dining table, his movements stiff and mechanical. He held the thick brown envelope in his hand like a weapon. With a sudden, violent motion, Arthur threw the dossier down. It landed with a heavy, flat slap that echoed in the silent room. Photographs spilled out across the table, sliding over the checkered tablecloth. Julian leaving the casino at dawn. The termination letter from the brokerage firm. The debt markers written in red ink. Julian froze. The slice of pizza halfway to his mouth lowered slowly. His face went pale, draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. He looked at the photos, then up at his father. What is this? Julian whispered, his voice trembling. Stop it, Arthur said. The anger he had been holding back surged forward, hot and suffocating. No more lies. No more games. You lost your job 2 years ago. You owe $150,000 to criminals. And you were drunk when you wrecked your car. Julian stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floorboards. He looked trapped. His eyes darted from the back door to the hallway, measuring the distance. For a split second, Arthur saw the wolf. He saw the snarl, the cornered aggression, the calculation of a predator assessing a threat. But then, as quickly as a light switch flipping, the wolf vanished. Julian crumpled. He did not fight. He did not run. He fell to his knees on the kitchen linoleum, burying his face in his hands, and began to sob. It was a guttural, wretched sound, the sound of a child who had been broken. "I am sorry," Julian wailed, his shoulders shaking. "Oh God, Dad, I am so sorry. I did not want you to know. I was so ashamed." Arthur stood over him, trembling with adrenaline. "You tried to steal my house, Julian. I found the papers in the trash. You drafted a deed to transfer my home to yourself. I was desperate." Julian looked up, his face streaming with tears, his eyes wide and pleading. "They threatened me, Dad. They said they would hurt you. They said if I did not pay, they would burn this house down with you inside. I was trying to protect you." Arthur felt his resolve wavering. The sight of his son on the floor, broken and weeping, tore at the scar tissue of his heart. This was not the cold monster Saul had described. This was his boy. "I messed up," Julian choked out, reaching out to grasp the hem of Arthur's coat. "I messed up so bad. Since Mom died. I just felt so lost. I tried to fill the hole with gambling, with drinking. I missed her so much, Dad. Every day. And I did not want to disappoint you." The mention of his wife was the dagger. Arthur closed his eyes. He saw the woman he had buried. He saw the little boy she had held, the boy he had taught to ride a bike. He did not see a sociopath. He saw a wounded animal caught in a trap of its own making. "I am a failure," Julian sobbed, bowing his head against the floor. "I should have just died in that crash. It would have been better for everyone." Arthur exhaled, a long, defeated breath. The anger drained away, replaced by a terrible, suffocating love. This was his flaw. This was his blindness. He could fight a monster, but he could not fight his son's pain. "Get up," Arthur said softly. Julian looked up, sniffing, his eyes red and swollen. "Dad?" "Get up, Julian." Arthur reached down and pulled his son to his feet. Julian was heavy, dead weight, leaning into his father like he used to when he was a sleepy toddler. Arthur looked him in the eye, searching for the truth and finding only desperate sorrow. "I am not going to let them hurt you," Arthur said, his voice firm. "And I am not going to let you lose yourself. We are going to fix this." Julian collapsed into Arthur's arms, hugging him tight. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you. I promise, I will make it right." Arthur held his son, patting his back, unaware that the wolf was not gone. It was just hiding behind the tears, waiting for the checkbook to open. The next morning, the rain had stopped, replaced by a flat, white sky that glared through the windows of the First National Bank. Arthur Vance sat across from a young bank officer named Shelley, a woman he had known since she was a teenage teller. She looked at the withdrawal slip, then at Arthur, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, tapping the paper with her pen. This is a significant amount. It is the entirety of your retirement savings, plus the emergency fund. Are you absolutely sure about this? There are penalties for early withdrawal on the CDs. Arthur stared at the pen in his hand. He thought about the 40 years of sawdust, calloused hands, and early mornings that this money represented. It was his safety net. It was his independence. It was the trips he was supposed to take but never did. But then he thought of Julian on the kitchen floor, weeping like a broken child. He thought of his wife and how she would never forgive him if he let their son drown when he had the power to save him. "I am sure, Shelley," Arthur said, his voice steady. "It is for a family matter." He signed the paper. The sound of the pen scratching against the document felt impossibly loud in the quiet office. He watched as she printed the cashier's check. $150,000. It was just a slip of paper, yellow and blue, but it weighed as much as a house. Arthur drove home with the check in his breast pocket, burning against his heart like a brand. Julian was waiting in the kitchen. He looked terrible, his eyes puffy, his skin sallow. He had not slept. When Arthur walked in, Julian stood up immediately, looking anxious, like a man waiting for a verdict from a jury. Arthur did not say a word. He walked to the wooden table and laid the check down in the center. Julian looked at it. He read the numbers. His breath hitched in his throat. He looked up at Arthur, his expression stunned. "Dad?" Julian whispered. "What is this?" "This clears the debt," Arthur said. His voice was not angry anymore. It was tired. It was the voice of a man who had given everything he had left to give. "This is it, Julian. This is every penny I have. There is nothing left after this. No savings. No buffer." Julian reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the edge of the check. You did this for me. After everything I did." Arthur sat down heavily in the chair opposite him. He looked his son in the eye, trying to find the truth in them. "I did it for your mother," Arthur said. "And for the boy you used to be. But there are conditions, Julian. Strict ones. This is not a gift. It is a lifeline." "Anything," Julian said quickly, his head bobbing. "I will do anything. First, the money goes directly to the debt. Today. You clear it, and you bring me the receipt. Second, you go to meetings. Narcotics Anonymous. Gamblers Anonymous. Whatever it takes. Every single day. I want to see the chips." "I will," Julian nodded vigorously. "I promise." "Third," Arthur continued, leaning forward, his gaze hardening. "You are done with the lies. You start working with me in the shop. You relearn what it means to earn $1 with your hands, not with a scan. You rebuild your life, honest and clean. If you lie to me one more time, Julian, you leave this house and you never come back." Julian picked up the check. He held it like it was a holy relic. Tears welled up in his eyes again, spilling over his cheeks. "Thank you, Dad," he choked out. "You saved my life. I swear to you, I will make you proud. I will be the son you deserve. I will work every day until I pay you back every cent." Arthur looked at him, searching for the wolf, searching for the deception, but he saw only gratitude. He felt a heavy weight lift from his shoulders. He had done the right thing. He had chosen love over money. He had chosen his family. "Go," Arthur said. "Pay them, And then come home. Julian stood up and rounded the table. He hugged Arthur, squeezing him tight, burying his face in Arthur's shoulder. Arthur hesitated for a moment, then wrapped his arms around his son, patting his back. "I love you, Dad," Julian whispered. "I love you too, son." Arthur watched Julian leave the house, the check tucked safely in his pocket. He watched his truck pull out of the driveway. He felt lighter, poorer, but hopeful. He believed he had just bought his son's soul back from the devil. He did not know that he had just funded the down payment on his own destruction. For the next 30 days, the house in West Seattle felt like a home again. The heavy cloud of secrecy and dread that had hung over the rafters seemed to lift, replaced by the clean, sharp scent of sawdust and floor wax. Julian kept his word. He was in the kitchen every morning at 7 o'clock, making coffee, his face freshly shaved and clear. He went to his meetings in the city 3 times a week, bringing back signed attendance cards like a schoolboy showing off a report card. But mostly, he was in the workshop. Arthur watched him from the doorway, a mug of tea in his hand, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt since his wife died. Julian was sanding a cherry wood cabinet, his movements rhythmic and patient. He wore Arthur's old canvas apron, covered in dust. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't pacing. He was working. "You have a good hand for the grain," Arthur said, stepping into the shop. "You always did, even when you were a kid." Julian looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He smiled. It wasn't the charming, plastic smile of the real estate broker. It looked tired, but genuine. "It feels good, Dad," Julian said. "To actually make something. To see the result at the end of the day." I forgot what that felt like. They fell into a routine that felt seductive in its normalcy. They ate lunch on the porch, watching the rain nurture the garden. They listened to the Mariners games on the radio in the evenings, groaning together when the pitcher walked a batter. It was the life Arthur had prayed for in the hospital. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he had saved his son. But peace built on a foundation of money is often just a lease, not a purchase. On a Sunday afternoon, Sarah's station wagon pulled into the driveway. Arthur's daughter drove down from Bellingham, her face set in a line of grim determination. She was a high school teacher, a woman who spent her days spotting lies and excuses from teenagers, and she had never possessed Arthur's blind spot for her brother. She sat in the living room while Julian was out in the shop, accepting a cup of coffee but not drinking it. Her eyes tracked Arthur's movements, filled with a mixture of pity and frustration. "He is playing you, Dad," Sarah said bluntly. Arthur frowned, setting his own mug down a little too hard on the coaster. He felt the defensive wall go up instantly. "He is not playing me, Sarah. He is trying. He has been sober for a month. He is working hard every single day. You should see him with the lathe." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I watched him through the window when I pulled up. I watched him when he thought no one was looking. And..." Arthur challenged. "He stopped sanding, Dad." He took out his phone. And the look on his face, it wasn't the look of a man who is finding peace in hard work. It was the look of a man checking a timer. "You are being unfair," Arthur snapped. "You have always been hard on him. You are jealous because I helped him." Sarah stood up, her voice rising. "Jealous? Dad, you gave him $150,000. That was your life savings. That was your security. And do you really think a gambling addict who owes that kind of money to the mob just stops because he promised?" He paid the debt, Arthur said, his voice trembling. He showed me the receipt. Paper can be forged, Dad. Sarah walked over to him, grabbing his hands. Please, listen to me. I look at him and I do not see gratitude. I see assessment. He looks at you like you are a resource he is managing, not a father he loves. He is waiting for something. Arthur pulled his hands away. He could not hear this. If Sarah was right, then Arthur was a fool. If Sarah was right, he had thrown his future away for nothing. It was too painful to consider, so he chose anger instead. If you cannot support your brother when he is finally turning his life around, then maybe you should leave, Arthur said coldly. Sarah recoiled as if he had slapped her. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. I hope you are right, Dad, she whispered. God, I hope you are right. But I have a bad feeling. A really bad feeling. She picked up her purse and walked out the door. She did not say goodbye to Julian. Arthur stood in a living room, his heart pounding. He watched her car disappear down the street. He felt a flicker of doubt, a tiny, cold worm in his gut, but he crushed it. He walked to the back door and looked out at the workshop. Julian was there, sanding the cabinet, his head bowed in concentration. He looked peaceful. He looked safe. Arthur told himself Sarah was wrong. He told himself that love was enough. He went back into the kitchen to start dinner, unaware that the timer Sarah had mentioned was already counting down to 0. 2 days after Sarah left, the phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a crisp, clear sound that sliced through the quiet humming of the refrigerator. Arthur was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters with a lemon-scented cloth. Julian had gone into town to pick up more varnish for the cabinets they were refinishing, whistling as he walked out the door. The house felt peaceful, settled in its new, hopeful rhythm. Arthur picked up the receiver, expecting a telemarketer or perhaps Sarah calling to apologize for her outburst. Hello. Arthur said. Good afternoon. May I speak with Mr. Arthur Vance, please? It was a woman's voice, professional and brisk, with the tinny quality of a call center headset. This is he. Mr. Vance, this is Linda from the underwriting department at Shield Life Insurance. I am calling to quickly verify a few details regarding your new application before we finalize the policy. Arthur paused, but cloth in his hand stopping mid-circle on the granite. He frowned at the receiver, confusion knitting his eyebrows together. I am sorry, you must have the wrong number, Arthur said politely. I did not apply for any new insurance. I have had my policy with State Farm for 20 years. I am fully covered. There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by the rapid clicking of keyboard keys. Is this Arthur Vance, date of birth March 15, 1955? Residing at 4208 Chilberg Avenue. Yes, that is me, Arthur said, a sudden prickle of unease touching the back of his neck like a cold finger. But like I said, I did not apply for anything. The woman's voice became more cautious, stripped of its customer service warmth. Sir, we received an electronic application last Thursday. It was submitted with your social security number, your driver's license number, and a digital signature. It is for a term life policy. Arthur gripped the edge of the counter. The granite felt impossibly cold under his fingertips. The silence in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, pressing in on his eardrums. What kind of policy? He asked, his voice dropping to a rasping whisper. A 10-year term life policy, Mr. Vance. With a death benefit of $2 million. The kitchen tilted. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed to turn gray and sickly. $2 million. It was a number that didn't belong in Arthur's world. It was a lottery ticket. It was a ransom. It was an amount that made $150,000 look like pocket change. And Arthur swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. Who is the beneficiary? The keyboard clicked again, loud and sharp in his ear. The sole beneficiary is listed as Julian Vance. Your son. 100%. Arthur did not breathe. He did not blink. He stood frozen in his kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the faint static of the line. The world slowed down. The hum of the refrigerator became a roar. Sir. Are you still there? Cancel it, Arthur said. His voice sounded strange, hollow, as if it were coming from a stranger standing across the room. Cancel it immediately. It is a mistake. It is fraud. I understand, sir. I will flag this for the fraud department and put a hold on the application. You should probably contact the police. Arthur hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The receiver clicked into the cradle with a finality that echoed through the empty house. He stood there for a long time. The lemon scent of the cleaning cloth suddenly smelled cloying, sickening. He looked out the window at the backyard. He saw the workshop where he and Julian had spent the last month. He saw the unfinished cabinet standing on the sawhorse. He saw the illusion of the happy father and the redeemed son. It shattered. It didn't just break, it disintegrated into dust. Sarah had been right. Martha had been right. The $150,000 Arthur had sacrificed, his life's work, his security, it hadn't been a solution. It hadn't been a lifeline. It had just been a down payment. It was just enough to pay off the immediate threat to Julian's kneecaps so he could focus on the bigger prize. Julian didn't want to be a carpenter. He didn't want a fresh start. He didn't want his father's forgiveness. He wanted his father's death. $2 million. That was the price tag Julian had put on Arthur's life. That was the calculation. The months of sobriety, the meetings, the sanding of wood, the shared meals, the tears on the kitchen floor, it was all just overhead costs. An investment of time to secure the payout. Arthur felt a wave of nausea so violent he had to lean over the sink, dry heaving until his ribs ached. He wasn't sick from fear. He was sick from the sheer, naked cruelty of it. He had let the wolf in, fed it, nursed it, and slept soundly while it sharpened its teeth. He walked into the living room and sat in his armchair. He felt old. Older than he had ever felt in 70 years. His hands were shaking, not with age, but with the tremors of a man who has survived an earthquake only to realize the tsunami is coming. He looked at the front door. Julian would be home soon. He would walk through that door with a bag of varnish and that tired, grateful smile. He would ask about Arthur's day. He would offer to make dinner. And all the while, he would be checking his watch, wondering how long he had to wait before the accident could happen. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver watch Martha had given him. The metal was warm from his body heat. He opened the latch. The hands were ticking steadily, indifferent to his heartbreak. He realized then that the flaw wasn't in the watch. The flaw was in him. The flaw was his refusal to believe that his blood could be poisonous. He had blinded himself with love, and it had almost cost him his life. He closed the watch with a snap. The father who had written that check in the bank was dead. He had died the moment the woman from Shield Life said the words $2 million. The man sitting in the armchair now was someone else. He was cold. He was empty. And he was terrified. But terror, when compressed tight enough, turns into rage. Arthur picked up the phone again. He did not dial the police. The police would take reports. They would ask questions. They would warn Julian. And Julian would just spin another lie, claim it was identity theft, cry on the floor again. No. Arthur needed something stronger than the law. He needed the truth, captured and nailed down so tight it could never wiggle free. He dialed the number for the office with the frosted glass door in the industrial district. "Saul," Arthur said when the detective answered. His voice was steady, hard as flint. "Arthur, is everything okay?" "You were right," Arthur said. "He is not drowning. He is hunting. And I am the prey." There was a silence on the line. Then Saul spoke, his voice grim. "What did you find?" "A life insurance policy. $2 million. He opened it last week." "I see," Saul said quietly. "I am sorry, Arthur. I truly am." "Do not be sorry," Arthur said. "Just tell me what we do next. Because I am done being the victim." "I need you to listen to me," Saul said. "This changes the timeline. If the policy is in underwriting, he is waiting for approval. But once that is active, you are on a clock. We need hard evidence of intent. We need to catch him planning it." "How?" "I am coming over," Saul said. "I have a transponder. And I have listening devices. If he is hunting you, Arthur, then we are going to bait the trap." Arthur hung up. He looked around his living room, at the photos on the mantle, at the life he had built. It felt like a museum of a dead man. He stood up and walked to the window to watch for Julian's truck. The grief was gone, burned away by the acid of betrayal. All that was left was the countdown. And Arthur Vance decided, right then and there, that he would be the one holding the stopwatch. The revelation of the life insurance policy turned Arthur Vance into a man made of ice. He did not confront Julian when his son returned home that evening with the varnish. He did not scream. He simply accepted the bag, thanked him with a tight smile, and went back to the workshop to sand a piece of maple until his hands were numb, waiting for Saul Berkowitz to make the next move. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Saul arrived. He parked his sedan 2 blocks away and walked to the house, slipping into the driveway like a shadow. Julian was asleep in the guest room, the lights off, the house silent. Arthur met Saul at the back door, holding a finger to his lips. Without a word, Saul moved to Julian's truck. He worked with the swift precision of a surgeon, sliding beneath the dashboard on the passenger side. It took less than 3 minutes. When he emerged, he gave Arthur a curt nod and vanished back into the darkness. The next 48 hours were an exercise in psychological torture. Arthur watched Julian drive away in the morning, the bug silent and invisible in the cabin of the truck. He watched him come back in the evening, smiling, talking about the weather, asking what was for dinner. Every interaction felt tainted, every kind word a potential lie. Arthur carried a small receiver Saul had given him in his pocket, but he did not turn it on. Saul monitored the feed remotely, promising to call only when there was something worth hearing. On Thursday night, the call came. Arthur met Saul in the shadowed corner of a 24-hour grocery store parking lot. The rain had returned, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof of Arthur's truck. Saul sat in his own car, Window rolled down just enough to pass an object through. It was a small, black earbud attached to a digital recorder. "He made a call this afternoon," Saul said, his voice grim. He was parked outside a hardware store in Soto. "You need to hear this, Arthur. You need to know exactly what you are living with." Arthur took the device. His hands were shaking, but he forced them to be steady. He put the earbud in and pressed play. The recording was grainy at first, filled with the low hum of the truck's engine and the sound of windshield wipers. Then, the ringing of a phone. A woman answered. "Chloe." "Yeah, I am here. Can you talk?" Arthur flinched. It was Julian's voice, but stripped of the deferential softness he used in the house. This voice was hard, impatient, and cold. "I am alone," Julian said. "Listen, I talked to the broker. The policy is in final review. They are just waiting on the medical history, which I forged last week. We should be active by Monday." Chloe's voice came through, sharp and anxious. "Monday is cutting it close, Julian." The syndicate called again. "They are talking about interest. They said if we do not have a payment schedule by the end of the month, they are coming for the collateral." I know, Julian snapped. "Stop panicking. I have it under control." "Do you?" Chloe asked. "You said the accident would handle it. You said he was frail." "He is tougher than he looks," Julian's voice growled. "The old man is like a cockroach. I thought the stress of the debt would give him a heart attack, but he just paid it off. He thinks he saved me." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "So what is the plan?" Chloe asked. "We cannot wait 10 years for a term policy to pay out naturally." "No, we cannot," Julian said. The tone of his voice dropped, becoming flat and businesslike. "We need an accident. A real one this time. Not like the fender bender I had. Something final." "Jesus, Julian," Chloe whispered. "Do not get squeamish on me now, Chloe. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want them to break my legs? He is 70 years old. He has lived his life. He is just taking up space and sitting on a gold mine." There was a pause on the tape. Arthur sat in his truck, tears streaming silently down his face. He wasn't crying for himself. He was crying for the little boy he used to carry on his shoulders. That boy was dead. The thing speaking on the tape was something else entirely. "I will handle it," Julian continued. "I am building his trust. He thinks I am Saint Julian now. He trusts me completely. I will make it look like mechanical failure. Or a fall. It will be quick. Just be ready to file the claim the minute the coroner signs the paperwork." The recording ended with a click. Arthur pulled the earbud out as if it were burning him. He stared at the wet asphalt of the parking lot, the neon lights of the grocery store reflecting in the puddles like spilled oil. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just desperation. It was a complete absence of humanity. Julian did not see a father. He did not see a person. He saw an asset to be liquidated, an obstacle to be removed. Saul watched him from the other car. "He is a sociopath, Arthur," Saul said quietly through the open window. "He does not feel what you and I feel. He only sees objectives and obstacles. You are the obstacle." Arthur wiped his face with his sleeve. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The countdown wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was a literal schedule. Monday. The policy would be active by Monday. Arthur looked at Saul. He wants an accident, Arthur said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. Yes, Saul nodded. Then we give him one. Arthur handed the recorder back to Saul. He started his engine. The vibration of the truck felt different now. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a weapon in a war he hadn't known he was fighting. Arthur drove home, plotting the destruction of his own son with the same meticulous care he used to build furniture. The wolf was hungry. Arthur would make sure it choked on its next meal. 2 days later, the trap was set. It was a Saturday morning, the air crisp and cold after the rain. Arthur sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking. He heard the heavy rumble of his Ford truck pulling into the driveway. Julian walked in through the back door a moment later. He was wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag, wearing a smile that looked painted on. "Hey, Dad," Julian said, tossing the rag onto the counter. "I hope you do not mind. I noticed the truck was idling a little rough yesterday when I moved it. I took it down to a shop in Soto this morning while you were reading the paper." Arthur felt the muscles in his neck tighten, but he forced himself to take a calm sip of coffee. "You did?" Arthur asked. "Which shop?" "Just a place a friend recommended," Julian said, opening the fridge to grab a soda. They changed the oil, topped off the fluids. The mechanic said the transmission fluid was low, but he fixed it. "She is running smooth now." Arthur watched his son pop the tab on the soda can. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. "That was thoughtful of you," Arthur said. "I appreciate it. I just want you to be safe on the road, Dad," Julian said. He took a long drink, his eyes meeting Arthur's over the rim of the can. "You know how old trucks can be. Things break when you least expect it." "Yes," Arthur said, holding his gaze. "They certainly do." That night, Arthur waited until the house was dark and the rhythm of Julian's breathing was steady from the guest room. He unlocked the back door. Saul Berkowitz was waiting in the shadows of the garage, accompanied by a man in coveralls carrying a heavy tool bag. "This is Mike," Saul whispered. "He is a forensic mechanic. He works with the insurance companies to spot fraud." Arthur nodded to the man. They moved silently to the truck. The garage smelled of cold concrete and the lingering scent of exhaust. Mike slid a creeper under the chassis of the Ford, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Arthur and Saul stood in the silence, listening to the metallic clinking and a soft scuffing of boots against the floor. It took 10 minutes. It felt like 10 years. Finally, Mike slid out from under the truck. He sat up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. He looked grim. "Is it the transmission?" Arthur asked, knowing the answer before he spoke. "No," Mike said quietly. He pulled out his phone and showed Arthur a photo taken in the harsh glare of the undercarriage light. It was a close-up of a black rubber hose encased in metal mesh. "It is the brake line," Mike said. "Specifically, the rear hydraulic line." Arthur squinted at the image. He saw a faint, silver scratch on the line. "It looks like a nick," Arthur said. "It is not a nick," Mike corrected him. "It is a file mark. Someone took a metal file and scored the line. They did not cut all the way through, because then you would have noticed a leak immediately in the driveway." "So what does it do?" Saul asked. Mike stood up. "It creates a weak point. A time bomb. As long as you are driving around the neighborhood at 20 or 30 miles per hour, the pressure is low enough that the line holds. But the moment you get on the highway, the moment you hit 50 or 60 miles per hour and have to slam on the brakes, The pressure spikes, Saul finished, and the line bursts, Mike said. You lose all hydraulic pressure instantly. The pedal goes to the floor. You have no brakes. At 60 miles per hour, on the I-5 off-ramp, you go right through the guardrail. Arthur looked at his truck. He had bought it 10 years ago. He had driven Julian to college in it. He had hauled lumber for the deck in it. It was a tool of his trade, a symbol of his reliability. Now, it was a murder weapon. Julian had not just tampered with it. He had engineered it. He had calculated the physics of his father's death. Arthur reached out and touched the cold metal of the hood. His hand was trembling. It was not fear. The fear had burned away days ago. It was a rage so pure and white-hot that he felt lightheaded. He stood in the garage, realizing that the son he loved was not just a thief. He was an executioner. Julian had looked him in the eye that morning, drank a soda in his kitchen, and smiled, knowing that the next time Arthur drove to the hardware store might be the last time he breathed. We have him, Saul said softly. This is attempted murder. We can call the police right now. Mike's testimony will put him away. Arthur stared at the truck. He thought about the trial. He thought about Julian crying on the stand, claiming it was a mistake, claiming the mechanic in Soto was incompetent. He thought about the doubt that a good lawyer could sow. No, Arthur said. His voice was steady, vibrating with the engine of his resolve. No. Saul asked, if we call the police now, he claims ignorance, Arthur said. He blames the shop. He weasels out of it. He gets a slap on the wrist for fraud, maybe. And in 5 years, he comes back to finish the job. Arthur turned to look at Saul. The darkness of the garage seemed to gather in his eyes. He wants an accident, Arthur said. He is waiting for a phone call from the police saying I went through a guardrail. Saul nodded slowly. Yes. Then let us give him that call, Arthur said. I want him to think he won. I want to see his face when he thinks I am dead. And then I want to see his face when I rise from the grave. You want to stage the crash? Saul asked. Arthur looked at the brake line photo one last time. I want to catch him standing over the body, Arthur said. Set it up, Saul. We do it tomorrow. He turned and walked back into the house, leading the sabotage truck in the dark, waiting for its final drive. Arthur went to his room, but he did not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the silence of the house, waiting for the sun to rise on the day he would die. The logistics of staging a death were surprisingly mundane. That was Arthur Vance's first thought as he sat in Saul Berkowitz's sedan later that night, parked 2 streets away from his own home to avoid waking Julian. Saul was on the phone, his voice a low rumble in the dark car. He was speaking to a contact in the Keene County Sheriff's Department, a man named Detective Miller who specialized in vehicular fraud. Yes, we have the forensic evidence, Saul said. We have the photos of the cut line. We have the motive. But Arthur wants to catch him in the act of celebration. We need a controlled crash. Arthur stared out the window at the sleeping neighborhood. It was strange to think that in a few hours, he would be driving a weapon aimed at himself. Saul hung up the phone and turned to Arthur. It is set. There is a stretch of decommissioned road near the old Naval Air Station. It is fenced off, private. We have a team meeting us there at noon tomorrow. Miller is bringing a crash crew. Arthur nodded, his face illuminated by the passing headlights of a late-night delivery truck. You understand the risk, Arthur? Saul asked, his eyes serious. Even a controlled crash is a crash. You have to hit the barrier fast enough to deploy the airbags and crumple the front end. If you do not, the insurance adjuster will know it was staged. You are going to get hurt. I have been hurt before, Arthur said quietly. I have fallen off ladders. I have had lumber crush my toes. A few bruises are a small price to pay for the truth. Go home, Saul said. Get some sleep. And Arthur, when you wake up, you have to give the performance of your life. He has to believe you are just going for a Sunday drive. Arthur sneaked back into his house, moving like a ghost through the hallway. He passed the guest room door. Julian was silent inside, dreaming of $2 million. The next morning, Sunday, broke with a rare, blinding sunshine that made the wet pavement sparkle. It was the kind of Seattle morning that usually made Arthur want to work in the garden. Today, it felt like a spotlight. Arthur walked into the kitchen at 8 o'clock. Julian was already there, drinking coffee and reading news on his phone. He looked up, his face composing itself into that familiar, easy smile. Morning, Dad, Julian said. Beautiful day out. It is, Arthur agreed. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his hands steady. I was thinking I might take the truck out. Head down to the marina, maybe drive along the coast. Get some fresh air. Arthur watched Julian's eyes. For a fraction of a second, there was a flicker of intense interest, a dilation of the pupils. The predator seeing the prey step into the trap. That sounds like a great idea, Julian said, his voice casual. The truck is running great since I got it fixed. It will be good for you to get out of the house. Arthur sipped his coffee. It tasted like ash. Do you want to come with me? Julian hesitated. He shook his head. No, I have some paperwork to catch up on here. You go. Enjoy the drive. Of course, he didn't want to come. He didn't want to be in the passenger seat when the brake line snapped. He wanted to be at home, waiting for the phone to ring. I will see you later then, Arthur said. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the drying rack. He walked to the hallway, put on his coat and his cap. He picked up his keys. Julian followed him to the door, leaning against the frame. Drive safe, Dad, Julian said. Arthur looked at his son. He looked at the face that resembled his own, the eyes that were the same color as his late wife's. He tried to find a shred of hesitation, a moment of regret. There was none. Just anticipation. I always do, Arthur said. He walked to the truck, climbed in, and started the engine. It roared to life, sounding strong and reliable. Arthur backed out of the driveway. He saw Julian watching from the window, a silhouette framed by the morning sun. Arthur waved. Julian waved back. Arthur drove away, knowing he would never see his son as a free man again. He drove carefully, keeping his speed under 25 miles per hour as he navigated the residential streets. He could feel the vibration of the pedal under his foot. He imagined the hydraulic fluid pulsing through the lines, pushing against the weakened rubber mesh where the file had done its work. One hard stop, Mike had said. That was all it would take. He reached the rendezvous point near the naval station 40 minutes later. It was a desolate strip of asphalt surrounded by chain-link fences and overgrown blackberry bushes. A police cruiser was parked near the gate, along with an ambulance and a flatbed tow truck. Saul was standing by the cruiser, talking to a man in a windbreaker. Arthur pulled up and parked. He kept the engine running. Saul walked over, leaning into the open window. This is Detective Miller. And the EMTs are on standby. Miller nodded to Arthur. He looked like a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. "Mr. Vance, we have set up a concrete barrier at the end of the straightaway. It is padded with impact barrels to absorb some of the force, but you need to hit it at 30 miles per hour to make the damage look consistent with a highway off-ramp crash." 30, Arthur repeated. "Do not touch the brakes," Miller instructed. "We need the line to burst on impact or right before. If you brake too early and drag it, the skid marks will be wrong. You have to drive straight into the wall." Arthur looked down the road. The orange barrel stood waiting about 200 yards away. "Are you ready?" Saul asked. Arthur gripped the steering wheel. He felt a strange calmness settling over him. This wasn't suicide. It was an exorcism. He was driving the old Arthur Vance, the blind father, into that wall. The man who walked away would be someone else. "I am ready," Arthur said. He rolled up the window. He checked his seatbelt. He shifted the truck into drive. Arthur pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward. 10 miles per hour. The gravel crunched under the tires. 15. 20. The barrels grew larger in the windshield. 25. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to lift his foot, to turn the wheel, to save himself. It was the survival instinct of 70 years of life. He fought it down. He thought of the $2 million policy. He thought of Julian's smile. 30 miles per hour. He was 3 seconds away. 2 seconds. Arthur braced himself. He did not close his eyes. He wanted to see it coming. At the last possible moment, he stomped on the brake pedal with all his strength. There was a sickening pop, audible even over the engine roar. The pedal went limp, slapping against the floorboard with zero resistance. The truck did not slow down. It lunged forward, free of all restraint. Arthur steered slightly to the right, aiming for the center of the barrels. The impact was louder than he expected. It was a thunderclap of tearing metal and shattering glass. The world turned violent. The steering wheel jerked out of his hands. The seatbelt locked, digging into his chest like a saw blade. Then, the white explosion. The airbag detonated, punching him in the face with the force of a prizefighter. Dust filled the cabin. The smell of burning chemicals and hot rubber choked him. The truck spun, the rear end whipping around, and slammed into the secondary barrier with a bone-jarring crunch. Then, silence. Arthur sat in the ruin of his truck. His ears were ringing. His nose was throbbing, warm blood trickling down his lip. His chest ached where the belt had caught him. He was alive. The door was wrenched open. Hands were on him. "Mr. Vance. Can you hear me?" It was the EMT. Arthur nodded, coughing in the dust. "I am okay," Arthur wheezed. "I am okay. We are going to get you out," the EMT said. "Stay still." They pulled him out of the truck and laid him on a stretcher. Arthur looked back at the Ford. The front end was crushed, steam rising from the radiator. It looked like a death trap. It looked perfect. Saul appeared above him, looking down with a grim expression. "You did it," Saul said quietly. "It looks real." Arthur wiped the blood from his nose. "Make the call," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "Call him. Tell him I am in critical condition." Detective Miller stepped forward, phone in hand. "We are transporting you to Harborview. We will control the scene there. No visitors except family. Arthur lay back as they loaded him into the ambulance. He closed his eyes, not from pain, but from exhaustion. The trap was sprung. Now, all he had to do was wait for the wolf to come and claim his prize. Harborview Medical Center was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city. Arthur Vance lay in a private room on the 4th floor, the blinds drawn to simulate the gravity of his condition. He was rigged to a heart monitor that beeped a steady, hypnotic rhythm. His head was wrapped in white gauze, a theatrical touch suggested by the doctor in On the Sting, and his arm was immobilized in a splint. He was not critically injured. The airbag had done its job, leaving him with a broken nose, a constellation of bruises across his chest, and a mild concussion. But to anyone walking through the door, he looked like a man clinging to life by a thread. Saul Berkowitz stood in a corner of the room, hidden in the shadows of a tall equipment rack. A small camera was positioned on the bedside table, disguised as a digital clock, its lens pointed directly at the chair where a visitor would sit. "He is here," Saul whispered, checking his phone. "He just parked. He ran 2 red lights to get here." Arthur closed his eyes. He focused on his breathing, making it shallow and raspy. He needed to be weak. He needed to be fading. The door burst open. It wasn't a gentle entrance. It was a performance. Julian rushed into the room, his face a mask of frantic terror. His hair was disheveled, his jacket half unzipped. He stopped at the foot of the bed, staring at Arthur with wide, watery eyes. "Dad. Oh my God, Dad." Julian threw himself at the side of the bed, grabbing Arthur's good hand. His grip was tight, trembling. "I got the call. They said the brakes. Oh God, I thought I lost you." Julian sobbed, burying his face in the mattress near Arthur's hip. Arthur lay still. He felt the vibration of his son's sobs against the bed frame. It was a masterpiece of acting. If Arthur hadn't heard the tape, if he hadn't seen the cut line, he would have believed it. He would have comforted him. Arthur let out a low groan, his eyelids fluttering open. He looked at Julian through a haze of feigned confusion. "Julian?" Arthur whispered, his voice dry and cracking. "I am here, Dad. I am right here." Julian lifted his head. His cheeks were wet with tears, but his eyes were scanning the monitors, checking the heart rate, the oxygen levels. "What happened?" Arthur asked. "The truck, it wouldn't stop." "I know, Dad, I know. The police said it was a mechanical failure. The brake line must have burst. I am so sorry. I should have checked it myself. I never should have let you drive it." Julian squeezed Arthur's hand. "I was so scared. When the officer called me, I thought my life was over." Arthur watched him. He saw the way Julian's eyes lingered on the 4 bag, then flicked to the door to make sure they were alone. "Am I going to make it?" Arthur asked. "Of course you are," Julian said, a little too quickly. "You are a fighter. The doctor said you are stable. You just need rest." Stable. Arthur saw the micro-expression flash across Julian's face as he said the word. It wasn't relief. It was a flicker of annoyance. A tightening of the jaw. Stable meant alive. Stable meant the policy didn't pay out. Stable meant the debt was still due on Monday. Julian stood up, wiping his face with his sleeve. He began to pace the small room, his agitation palpable. "I am going to take care of everything, Dad," Julian said. "You do not worry about a thing." I will handle the insurance, the house, the bills. You just focus on letting go. I mean, resting. He had almost said it. Letting go. Julian walked to the window and peered through the blinds. His back was to Arthur. Arthur saw his son pull his phone out of his pocket and type a furious text message. Arthur glanced at the clock camera. It was recording everything. The fake tears. The pacing. The disappointment. Julian turned back around, composing his face into a sympathetic smile. I am going to step out for a second, Dad. Get some water. Call Sarah and let her know you are okay. Don't. Arthur wheezed. Don't worry her. I have to, Dad. She is family. Julian leaned over and kissed Arthur on the forehead. His lips were cold. Love you, Dad. Hang in there. Julian walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Saul stepped out of the shadows. Did you see it? Arthur asked, his voice returning to its normal strength, though thick with sadness. I saw it, Saul said. He checked the text he sent. It was to Chloe. It said, he is still breathing. Plan B, Arthur closed his eyes. The pain in his chest had nothing to do with the seatbelt. What is Plan B? Arthur asked. Saul looked grim. We will find out soon enough. Desperate men do not wait, Arthur. He has until Monday. He is going to try again. And this time, he won't rely on a mechanic. He will do it himself. Arthur stared at the ceiling tiles. He felt a strange sense of detachment. The son he had raised was gone, replaced by this creature of debt and lies. Let him try, Arthur said softly. I will be ready. 2 days later, Arthur was discharged. He insisted on going home, claiming he hated hospitals. Julian picked him up in his own car, driving with exaggerated caution. He was solicitous, gentle, helping Arthur into the house and setting him up in the armchair with blankets and tea. But the air in the house was electric with tension. Julian hovered. He watched Arthur take his pain medication. He watched him walk up the stairs. He was like a vulture circling a wounded animal, waiting for it to stumble. On Saturday morning, the invitation came. Julian walked into the living room where Arthur was reading a book. He looked energized, his eyes bright. Dad, I was thinking, Julian said. You have been cooped up in here for days. It is depressing. You need fresh air to heal. Arthur looked up over his reading glasses. What did you have in mind? A friend of mine lent me his boat for the weekend, Julian said. A nice yacht, docked down at Leshy. It is calm on the lake today. Why don't we go out? Just you and me. We can drift, watch the sunset. It will be peaceful. Arthur felt a chill run down his arms. A boat. Deep water. No witnesses. It was the classic setting for an accidental drowning. An old man, dizzy from a concussion, slips on a wet deck. A tragic mishap. Arthur looked at his son. He saw the eagerness in Julian's posture. That sounds nice, Julian, Arthur said. I think I would like that. Great. Julian clapped his hands together. I will pack a cooler. We can leave in an hour. Arthur waited for Julian to go to the kitchen. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Saul, * the lake. Today. He is taking me on a boat, *. Saul's reply came instantly. * We are ready. The Coast Guard is briefed. Do not get on that boat without the wire, Arthur stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray sky. It was a perfect day for a tragedy. He just had to make sure it was the right one. The hour before they left for the marina was a blur of calculated movement. While Julian was in the kitchen packing a cooler with ice and sandwiches, Arthur excused himself to the garage, claiming he needed his heavy coat. He did not go for the coat. He opened the side door where Saul Berkowitz was waiting in the blind spot of the neighbor's hedges. The detective looked grim, holding a small roll of medical tape and a flat, black device no larger than a credit card. Lift your shirt, Saul whispered. Arthur complied. Saul taped the device to the center of Arthur's chest, right over his sternum. The adhesive was cold against his skin. The microphone is sensitive, Saul said, smoothing the tape down. It will pick up everything. The GPS tracker is embedded in the casing. We will be following you in an unmarked boat, keeping a half-mile distance so he does not spot us. The helicopter is on standby at Boeing Field. Arthur lowered his shirt and buttoned his flannel. He could feel the hard square of plastic pressing against his skin, a constant reminder of the danger. What is the code? Saul asked. Arthur looked him in the eye. The water is cold, good. Say it clearly. The moment you say those words, we move in. Do not wait until you are in the water, Arthur. If he touches you, if he makes a threat, you say it. I understand. Arthur grabbed his heavy wool coat from the hook and walked back into the house. He found Julian waiting by the front door, holding the cooler. He looked like a man going on a vacation, wearing sunglasses and a windbreaker. Ready to go, Dad? Julian asked. Ready, Arthur lied. The drive to the Leshy Marina took 20 minutes. They drove in Julian's luxury sedan, the leather seats soft and smelling of new money. Julian played soft jazz on the stereo, humming along, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. He seemed relaxed, almost giddy. It was the energy of a man who could see the finish line of a long, exhausting race. Arthur sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing city. He watched people walking their dogs, couples holding hands, children playing in the parks. They lived in a world where fathers and sons loved each other. Arthur had been exiled from that world. He was now living in a silent war zone. They pulled into the marina parking lot. The sky was a flat, slate gray, the clouds low and heavy. The water of Lake Washington looked like dark glass, calm and forbidding. The boat was docked at the end of Pier 4. It was a 40-foot cabin cruiser named the Second Chance. Arthur almost laughed at the irony. Nice, isn't it? Julian said, gesturing to the sleek white vessel. My friend lets me use it whenever I want. Arthur stepped onto the wooden dock. The air was colder here, carrying the smell of algae and gasoline. He walked slowly, feigning the stiffness of his injuries from the truck crash. Julian walked beside him, hovering, ready to catch him if he stumbled. Careful, Dad, Julian said, taking his elbow. The wood is a little slick. Arthur felt the warmth of his son's hand through his coat. It was the hand that had held a baseball bat. The hand that had signed the forged deed. The hand that had cut the brake line. Arthur fought the urge to pull away. They reached the boat. Julian hopped aboard first, tying off the lines with practiced ease. He reached a hand out to help Arthur. Come on aboard, Captain, Julian smiled. Arthur looked at the hand. He looked at the dark water swirling between the dock and the hull. It was deep here. Cold. He took Julian's hand and stepped onto the deck. The boat rocked gently beneath his feet. Arthur sat on a cushioned bench near the stern while Julian busied himself with the controls. The engines roared to life, a deep, throbbing rumble that vibrated through the deck plates and into Arthur's bones. Julian cast off the lines. He steered the boat away from the dock, guiding it out through the maze of moored vessels toward the open water. Arthur watched the shore recede. He saw the cars in the parking lot turn into toys. He saw the houses on the hill shrink into dots. With every yard of distance, the law felt further away. The rules of civilization were being left behind on the dock. Out here, there were only two men and the truth. Julian throttled up. The bow rose, cutting through the gray water. The wind whipped at Arthur's face, stinging his eyes. "How are you doing back there, Dad?" Julian called out over the roar of the engines. "I am fine," Arthur shouted back. "Just enjoying the view." Julian turned and flashed a thumbs up. He looked happy. He looked free. They drove for 30 minutes, heading north toward the center of the lake, away from the busy shipping lanes and the prying eyes of other boaters. The shoreline became a distant gray smudge. Finally, Julian slowed the boat. The roar of the engines died down to a soft idle. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was heavy and suffocating. The boat bobbed in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of empty water. Julian cut the engine completely. Now it was just the sound of the wind and the lap of waves against the hull. "Peaceful, right?" Julian said. He walked away from the helm and went down into the cabin below. Arthur heard the sound of ice shifting in the cooler. A moment later, Julian reappeared holding 2 glass tumblers and a bottle of expensive whiskey. He walked toward Arthur, the bottle clinking against the glasses. The smile was gone. His face was blank, unreadable behind the sunglasses. Arthur felt the tape on his chest itch. He shifted his weight, preparing himself. He was an old man, bruised and battered, trapped on a floating cage with a predator. Julian stopped a few feet away. He poured a generous amount of amber liquid into each glass. He held one out to Arthur. "Here, Dad," Julian said softly. "Drink with me. To the future." Arthur looked at the glass. He looked at his son. "I do not think I should," Arthur said. "The pain medication." "One drink won't kill you," Julian interrupted. His voice had changed. It was harder now. Sharper. Arthur took the glass. He did not drink. He held it in both hands, feeling the cold slide of the condensation. Julian took a sip of his own whiskey. He took off his sunglasses and folded them into his pocket. He looked at Arthur with eyes that were terrifyingly empty. "You know, Dad," Julian said, looking out at the water. "I really thought the truck would do it." Arthur's heart hammered against the wire. "Do what?" Arthur asked quietly. "End it," Julian said. He turned to face his father. It was a perfect setup. The mechanic. The road. The barrier. You were supposed to go right through it. Arthur set the glass down on the bench. He stood up slowly. "You cut the line," Arthur said. "I filed it," Julian corrected him. "Precision work. But you survived. You always survive. You are like a bad habit I cannot break." He took a step closer. The boat rocked. "Why, Julian?" Arthur asked. "After everything I did." I paid the debt. I gave you everything." "The debt was just the beginning," Julian said, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea how much I owe?" "The $150,000 was just interest, Dad. The principal is buried so deep I will never dig out. Unless I die," Arthur finished. Julian shrugged. "It is just math. You are 70. You have had a good run. I have half my life left. Why should I spend it looking over my shoulder when you are sitting on a $2 million policy? You took out a policy on me." "I did," Julian nodded. "And on Monday, the first premium is due. But if you have a tragic accident this weekend, the payout is guaranteed." He took another step. He was within arm's reach now. Arthur could smell the whiskey on his breath. "It is not personal, Dad," Julian said. "I actually love you, in my own way. But I love my life more. And right now, it is you or me." Arthur looked at the water. It was dark, churning, endless. "You are going to kill me," Arthur said. "I am going to help you have an accident," Julian said. "You slipped. You fell. The water was cold. Your heart couldn't take it." He lunged. Arthur stumbled back, hitting the railing. Julian's hands were on his chest, shoving him hard. The strength of the younger man was overwhelming. Arthur felt his feet leave the deck. He was tipping backward over the abyss. Arthur screamed the words, loud and clear into the gray sky. "The water is cold. The water is cold." Julian frowned, pausing for a fraction of a second, confused by the strange shout. "What?" Julian asked. That hesitation was all Arthur needed. He didn't go over the rail. He grabbed Julian's wrists with hands that had swung hammers for 50 years. He drove his knee upward, catching Julian in the stomach. Julian grunted, doubling over. Arthur didn't let go. He pulled his son down, wrestling him onto the wet fiberglass deck. They rolled, knocking over the whiskey bottle, shattering the glass. And then, the sound came. It started as a hum and grew into a roar. The sound of high-powered engines screaming across the water. Julian froze, pinned beneath Arthur's weight. He looked up. A police boat was tearing toward them, blue lights flashing, cutting a white wake through the gray lake. Above them, the rhythmic thumping of a helicopter rotor beat against the air. Julian's face went white. He looked at Arthur, realizing for the first time that the prey had teeth. "You." Julian gasped. Arthur looked down at his son. "It is over," Arthur said. The police boat slammed against the hull of the yacht. Officers in tactical gear swarmed over the rail, weapons drawn. "Police. Don't move." They hauled Julian off the deck, slamming him against the cabin wall, cuffing his hands behind his back. Arthur stood up, adjusting his coat. He touched the wire on his chest. He watched them drag his son away. Julian was screaming now, begging, crying, calling out for his father. Arthur turned his back. He looked out at the cold, gray water, and for the first time in months, he breathed. The ride back to the marina was a surreal procession of flashing blue lights cutting through the gray afternoon gloom. Arthur Vance sat in the stern of the police boat, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that smelled of damp wool and diesel. He watched the wake churning behind them, white foam dissolving into the dark water, much like the life he had known for 70 years was dissolving before his eyes. Saul Berkowitz sat beside him, silent and solid as a rock. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell Arthur that it would be okay. He simply offered his presence, a silent testament to the fact that Arthur had survived. Ahead of them, handcuffed to a metal bar in the cabin, Julian sat with his head bowed. He wasn't screaming anymore. The adrenaline of the struggle had faded, replaced by the crushing reality of his situation. He looked small, defeated, and utterly unfamiliar. Arthur tried to find the face of the boy he had taught to fish, the boy he had carried on his shoulders, but that face was gone. In its place was a stranger who had looked him in the eye and tried to murder him for an insurance payout. When they docked at Leshy, the scene was chaotic. Uniformed officers were waiting on the pier, their radios crackling with static. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered near the parking lot, drawn by the sirens and the spectacle of the police boats. Arthur stood up, his legs feeling heavy and unsteady, like he was walking on a sea of molasses. Saul reached out a hand to steady him. "Easy, Arthur," Saul said quietly. "Take your time." Arthur stepped onto the dock. The wood felt solid beneath his boots, a stark contrast to the shifting deck of the yacht. He took a deep breath of the cold air, trying to clear the smell of whiskey and fear from his lungs. "Dad!" The scream tore through the noise of the police radios. Arthur looked up to see Sarah sprinting down the pier, ducking under the yellow police tape. She looked frantic, her face pale, her coat flying open behind her. She slammed into him, wrapping her arms around his chest and burying her face in his neck. She was shaking violently. "I got the call," she sobbed. "Saul called me. Oh God, Dad. I was so scared. I thought I was too late." Arthur held his daughter, resting his chin on the top of her head. He felt the warmth of her tears soaking into his collar. For months, he had pushed her away. He had accused her of jealousy, of cruelty, when all she had tried to do was warn him. He had chosen the wolf over the shepherd, and it had almost cost him everything. "I am okay, Sarah," Arthur whispered, his voice raspy. "I am okay. You were right. You were right about everything." Sarah pulled back, looking at his bruised face, at the tape still sticking to his chest where the wire had been. She touched his cheek gently. He tried to, she couldn't finish the sentence. Arthur nodded. He looked over her shoulder as two officers led Julian off the boat. Julian looked up as he passed. His eyes met Sarah's. There was no apology in them. Just a cold, dead stare. Sarah shuddered and turned her back on her brother, shielding her father with her own body. Detective Miller approached them, holding a plastic evidence bag. "Mr. Vance, I need the recording device." Arthur unbuttoned his shirt. He ripped the tape off his skin with a sharp wince. He handed the small black square to the detective. It was warm from his body heat. It contained the voice of his son planning his death. It was the nail in the coffin. "We have everything we need," Miller said, placing the device in the bag. "The confession is clear. The assault is on video from the helicopter. We are booking him for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and grand larceny. He is not making bail, Mr. Vance. Not this time." Arthur nodded. He felt a strange hollowness in his chest, a void where his fear used to be. "Do I have to go to the station?" Arthur asked. "Not tonight," Miller said kindly. "Go home. Rest. We will need a formal statement tomorrow, but for now, you have done enough." Sarah drove him home. She refused to let him spend a minute alone. She drove his truck, while Arthur sat in the passenger seat of her station wagon, staring out the window at the passing city. The world looked exactly the same as it had that morning, yet it was entirely different. When they walked into the house in West Seattle, it was silent. The kitchen was exactly as they had left it. The coffee cup Arthur had used that morning was still in the sink. The cooler Julian had packed was on the counter, abandoned. It felt like a crime scene. Sarah moved through the house, turning on lights, banishing the shadows. She made tea. She ordered food that neither of them ate. She sat with him in the living room, holding his hand while the clock on the mantel ticked the seconds away. Late that night, Arthur went into the guest room. Julian's things were still there. His clothes were folded on the chair. His toothbrush was in the bathroom. The varnish he had bought for the cabinet sat on the dresser. Arthur picked up a cardboard box from the garage. He began to pack. He moved methodically, without anger, without tears. He took the clothes, the shoes, the toiletries. He took the photos of Julian from the hallway walls. He stripped the bed sheets. He was erasing him. He carried the boxes to the garage and stacked them next to the shredded documents he had pulled from the trash weeks ago. He stood there for a long time, looking at the physical remnants of his son's life. Martha's words came back to him. "You have to stop being a father now. You have to be a survivor." Arthur turned off the garage light, plunging the boxes into darkness. He walked back into the house and locked the door. He checked the deadbolt. He checked the windows. Then he went upstairs to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the silver watch from his pocket. He opened the latch. The hands were moving. Tick, tick, tick. He watched the second hand sweep around the face. He had survived the countdown. The bomb had gone off, and the smoke was clearing, and he was still standing. Arthur lay down, clutching the watch. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he slept a sleep that was deep, dreamless, and entirely his own. The nightmare was over. The morning had begun. 3 months passed. The physical wounds healed. The cut on Arthur's forehead faded to a thin white line and his ribs stopped aching when it rained. But the other wounds, the ones you cannot see, took longer to mend. On a cold morning in February, Arthur walked into the King County Courthouse to watch his son stand trial. The courtroom was packed with media and strangers who had followed the sensational case of the father who staged his own death to catch a killer. Arthur sat in the front row with Sarah on one side and Saul Berkowitz on the other. Julian sat at the defendant's table wearing a suit that looked too big for him now. His hair was cut short and his face was blank, as if this were happening to someone else. Their eyes met once, just once, and then Julian looked away. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. They played the recording from the truck. They showed the photos of the cut brake line. They played the video from the helicopter of Julian attacking his father on the boat. The evidence was a wall so high there was no climbing over it. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the silence in the room was heavy. The foreman stood. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of insurance fraud and grand larceny, we find the defendant guilty. Arthur stared straight ahead. He did not feel triumph. He felt a profound sense of loss. The judge delivered the sentence firmly. 20 years in state prison. Julian would be 58 years old when he saw freedom again. Arthur would be 90 if he was still alive. They led Julian away. At the door, he turned back. For 1 second, Arthur saw a flash of real regret, or perhaps just fear. Then the heavy doors closed and he was gone. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, but Arthur ignored them. He hugged Sarah tight. "It is over," she whispered. 6 months after the trial, Arthur put the Craftsman house in West Seattle up for sale. It held too many ghosts. He moved to a small town on the Oregon coast called Cannon Beach. He bought a modest cottage with a view of the ocean, a place that smelled of salt spray and pine needles instead of rain and betrayal. He set up a small workshop in the shed out back. He did not take commissions anymore. He built birdhouses. He built toy chests for the local children. He worked with the wood to heal himself, smoothing out the rough edges of his life with every stroke of the plane. 1 year later, Arthur drove back up to Washington. He went to the Riverside nursing home. He found Martha sitting by the window, older and frilier, watching the world go by. She smiled when she saw him. "You survived," she said softly. Arthur sat down and took her hand. "I did," he said. "Thanks to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver watch. He placed it in her palm. It was ticking. The second hand swept smoothly around the face. "You fixed it," Martha whispered. Arthur smiled. "It just needed a new mainspring. And a little patience." "Look at the time, Martha." She looked down. It was no longer stuck at 3:15. The hands read noon. High noon. The sun was at its peak. Arthur stayed for an hour, drinking tea and talking about the ocean. When he left, he felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He realized that family is not always blood. Family are the people who protect you, the people who warn you, the people who stand by you when the storm comes. He drove back to the coast, the silver watch ticking in his pocket, marking the time of a life that was finally, truly his own. Arthur Vance had learned the hardest lesson a father can learn, but he was still standing. He was alone, but he was safe. And as he watched the sun set over the Pacific, he knew that he was free. This story of Arthur and Julian is a painful reminder of a harsh reality that many of us face. It teaches us that blind trust, even in those we love the most, can sometimes lead to our destruction. The greatest lesson here is that we must value ourselves enough to set boundaries. Arthur thought that being a good father meant sacrificing everything, even his own safety, but he learned that true strength lies in the courage to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts. It teaches us that intuition is a powerful gift. When something feels wrong, when the warning signs appear, we must listen to them. Protecting yourself is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of survival. And sometimes, letting go is the only way to save yourself. We hope this story resonated with you and touched your heart. If you found value in Arthur's journey, please support our channel by clicking the subscribe button, liking this video, and sharing it with your friends and family so we can continue to bring you compelling stories every single day. We would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a situation where you had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself from someone you loved? Do you believe Arthur did the right thing? Please share your stories and feelings in the comments section below. We read every comment and cherish the connection we have with you. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our community. We wish you all abundant health, a life filled with joy, and peace in your hearts every single day. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.